You're
Welcome.
listening to America's Web Radio on the
Or not.
AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com.
Welcome. You're listening to Detailing Addiction. I'm Dr. Susan Blank. This is America's Web Radio. Today in studio, I have with me David Donaldson and Michael Daly from the Atlanta Healing Center. Hi, guys.
Hello. Hey, Susan.
Glad you're here today. This is an important topic that I think gets a little confusing for both our patients and their families, and for the population in general. And that's the question of how do you survive a relapse? So I really appreciate both of you being here with me and talking about this really important subject.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree. I think it's a crucial subject because
It evokes so many different feelings. There's a lot of fear that keeps people from wanting to talk about the possibility at all. And there's a lot of judgment that keeps people from coming back after they've had a relapse. So I think the more that we talk about it and the more that we normalize it as part of the disease of addiction, really part of any disease process, really relapse is a part of a disease process.
Especially a chronic disease.
Yeah. The more people have the opportunity to actually survive it.
Correct. You know, it's not uncommon for someone to get diagnosed with hypertension, for example, and they get started on one medication, and for a while that seems to manage their blood pressure just fine. And one day they walk into their doctor's office and their blood pressure's up again, or their heart rate's up, and the doctor evaluates them and wonders what's going on and makes adjustments to their lifestyle, or tries to, and sometimes has to add an additional medication. And it may be a while before they can get that blood pressure under control. So when we are thinking about chronic illnesses, and addiction is one of those, it is not uncommon for there to be periods of time when it is more difficult to manage the disease, and sometimes the person has a harder time with it. So I agree. I think normalizing it and talking about it is really important. I do have a question though. Do you have to relapse? Will everybody relapse?
Not necessarily. I think that when we talk about relapse, it's almost like we're saying, well, it's going to happen, or it should happen, or something that gives the idea that it's a necessary evil, and that's not true. It does not have to happen, but if it does happen, there's always a chance to come back from it.
Sometimes I feel like I'm talking with my patients like talking with my children about safe sex. You know, my first message is wait, don't get involved with relationships, take things slow, wait till you're older, make good choices. But if you do, then here's some ways to be safe and avoid getting a disease or having somebody get pregnant. So it's one of those difficult conversations sometimes, because we don't want people to panic and to make more bad choices if they have relapsed. On the other hand, we don't want people to feel like they're getting a get out of jail free card and, oh, well, everybody relapses, so this is okay, and I'll pick this up somewhere along the way.
Right.
So it's a difficult conversation to have with patients and their families.
Well, and I think also, when talking about relapse, you have to talk about whether it's a slip, which is a very short-lived relapse, or if it's a relapse where it becomes longer than however long, that it takes. But one is oops, I slipped, I got back up, and I'm right back on the horse. Whereas the other one is, I've been out for a while, I need to come back and really reevaluate where I was keeping my priorities for my sobriety.
And being willing to really stop and take a look at what happened to hopefully prevent future relapses, but also to learn what was unsatisfactory about the recovery process that can be improved. Part of what we have to talk, though, about is the reality that addiction is a fatal disease.
Yes.
And even a slip. I often talk with patients about a banana on the street, and you can be walking down the street and you can not see the banana and you can slip on it and you can fall. And most of the time you jump right back up and you look around and you hope nobody saw you and you're not all
You get
embarrassed.
bruised.
But every now and then someone breaks a neck.
Right.
And so slips are not something to be taken lightly. They can be very, very dangerous. But it's also not a moral failing that you've slipped on a banana. You got to get up and figure out how to clean up the street a little bit.
Right.
Well,
And yourself.
And yourself.
And also in this conversation, it depends on, I mean, I hate to say this because, addiction is addiction, but if you're using and are addicted to one substance, you might have a less fatal time with a slip than other things.
Right. Because if your dopamine releaser of choice or most frequent use is heroin,
Mm-hmm.
every time you use heroin these days, it's Russian roulette, because
Yes.
you have no idea how much you're getting, how potent it is it contaminated or purely fentanyl, and is this going to be the time that you overdose?
Well, and then also we have to look at, with a heroin person, how long has that person been using? How long has he or she remained clean for this period before their slip, and whether their tolerance has dropped drastically in that short amount of time, and then when they go to slip, they use too much and it's an overdose.
Right.
And in particular, if they've been on medicated assisted recovery that actually blocks the receptor sites, like some of them do, then they're at a really high risk of dying if they relapse. And so they need to have that warning really, really clear,
Right.
when that medication is prescribed.
And
Those medications.
those medications, yes, because depending on what you're taking, you can really be setting yourself up for a much more dangerous slip or relapse. So when someone is in early treatment, say they're still going through detox, or they're in the first few weeks of a outpatient program. Maybe they've been to a residential program for some period of time, and now they're coming home. They're in an intensive outpatient or an outpatient program, and they use once, come in the next day, telling themselves, is that a slip? Is that a relapse? Or is that just part of early recovery?
I think everyone has to decide that for themselves, that in the fact that if they were sober for a period of time, then they step down to a lesser amount of care, and then within that lesser amount of care they used, I would say that is a slip. If they're in the pre-contemplative stages where they're quitting but they're not sure, maybe I'll quit, maybe I won't, I'm going to try this, but it's not something that I'm 100%
Right.
bought into, then they may still be using, but just with a little time off beforehand.
For experimentation. And if they're there because they want to keep their wife happy or their parents happy or somebody
Or the
else happy
judge.
Mhm.
or the judge happy,
Mhm.
and they're not really actually quitting, then as Michael mentioned, pre-contemplation, they're still kind of figuring out, do I really have to quit? Do I have this problem? Or does everybody else just think I'm a drunk?
Well, and the interesting thing is that no matter where you are in that scenario,
Right.
once you've brought the question to mind, you're probably already there.
Yeah, once it's moved from pre-contemplation to you're actually having those thoughts in your brain, it's probably a pretty clear message that you need to quit.
That doesn't mean that you'll take that information and run with it. It means that you know it,
Right.
and it's there.
And lots of other people might know it, even if
Absolutely.
you don't at this point.
Right.
But I saw an interesting statistic when we were getting ready for this show that was looking at people in relapse rates. And it was talking about how when people get help, when they go to either treatment or AA and they use those programs, they have a lower relapse rate. In particular, if they get past that first year, if they do some sort of treatment and they're going to meetings and they get past that first year, they have a much higher success rate of getting to 5 years and a significantly higher success rate of getting to 16 years. So it was a real longitudinal study where they were able to look at that. So helping people, and I don't think it was pure abstinence that whole time period, but they were still alive and well and kicking when they reported on it at 16 years. So letting people know, if you have a slip and you just keep getting your support and using your recovery tools, you can put together a very long and happy life.
So I think we all agree that a brief use with a very quick, if not immediate, I'm going to call somebody, I'm going to get back working my program of recovery, that we would call that a slip.
Agree.
Yeah.
And that doesn't undo all the work that they've done before. It doesn't make them a bad person. It doesn't prevent them from going on and being in strong recovery after that. And in some ways, it can be a really important wake-up call that they've been letting some things slip and slide. They've not been as active in their recovery plan as they had been previously, that they've been entertaining some thoughts in their head, that they've been letting some stressful things in their life get the better of them. They're keeping some secrets. They're doing some other things that are taking them, again, away from their plan of recovery. They recognize it quickly. They feel remorse. They jump right back in, and they're ready to go and accept direction and help and ask for help. I think, would you not agree that would be a slip?
I would absolutely define that as a slip.
Yes, I agree.
And
even I think that if a person uses and continues to use from that first episode, making it a long-term episode, that I would still consider that a slip, like a week-long binge, because they've never really gotten to the point of being sober in that whole time, then that's pretty much a slip.
If they come back.
If they come back.
And we're going to come back in just a moment. I'd like to ask you to please keep listening as we talk about surviving a relapse.
The disease of addiction is a life-altering challenge, not just for the person suffering its effects, but also for the family and friends who support and love the one caught in its grasp. What should be the course of treatment? Who is the best person to render treatment? And what is the best place to go for the care that is needed? We know that you want answers to these and many more questions. Call 770-696-9862 and speak to a representative of the Atlanta Healing Center. They can tailor a program specifically designed to address the needs of the person suffering with an addiction, or give you guidance as to where that help may be found. Information is the key, and the trained staff at AHC is here to assist. If you wish, you can also get more information on the website located at www.atlantahealingcenter.com.
This is Daryl Pullis inviting you to listen to America's Homegrown Veggie Show right here every Saturday morning at 10 Eastern Time. Great guests, great tips, and valuable information about growing your own vegetables, fruits, and herbs.
Perhaps you are struggling to cope with the disease of addiction. If not, you probably know a family member or friend that needs help in battling the cravings and the personal and professional damage done by the effects of drugs or alcohol. Get a pen and paper and be ready to write down the following. These are the issues that the trained staff at the Atlanta Healing Center address and treat every day. Their doctors and counselors with over 40 years of practice in the field of addiction can treat the suffering individual in a thoughtful, compassionate, and experienced manner and guide him or her along the path to recovery. So call 770-696-9862 and speak to a knowledgeable staff member about how you or your loved one can be helped to enjoy a better and healthier life. More information is also available on the website at www.atlantahealingcenter.com.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
Welcome back. This is Detailing Addiction. I'm Dr. Susan Blank, and you're listening to America's Web Radio. Today, David Donaldson and Michael Daly are here with me from the Atlanta Healing Center, and we're talking about surviving relapse. In our attempt to really talk about relapse, we are trying to distinguish between a slip and a relapse. So, Michael, to your point, if you are a person who is a binge drinker, and you start on a Friday night and you just continually drink and drink and drink until you can't drink anymore, and you wake up and you go, uh-oh.
Damn it.
And I'm going to call my sponsor, I'm going to call my addiction recovery team, I'm going to ask for help, I'm going to go to a meeting, there's a number of things I'm going to do to get myself back, versus someone who exhibits addictive behavior.
Yes.
So the interesting thing about this is that we can't really define a slip by how long the using was, but we can define a slip as I used, I recognized it immediately, and I got right back as quickly as humanly possible to my recovery program, and I asked for help, versus someone who may have used and then they get up and use again the next day.
After having a little bit of clarity.
Right. And they use the next day, but there's some addictive behavior in that. So the addictive behavior we see as a way in which people begin to tell stories,
Make
keep secrets.
excuses.
Well, and one aspect of addiction, whether it's alcohol or opiates or whatever, is that substance or behavior becomes such a priority that everything in your life starts to revolve around making sure that that priority is taken care of. So some of the addictive behaviors that we see is that they're going to miss work because they need to either continue drinking or recover from a hangover.
Right.
They're going to certainly try to do cover-up behaviors. So they're going to, like, if they're being monitored or having drug screens, they're going to try and figure out a way to skip that or get around that. If they're having to lie to their spouse or something to keep them off their back, something to cover it up so that the addiction itself doesn't face the light of day.
That's a relapse.
That's where it's moved into a relapse. It's no longer a slip where I fell and I got right back up and I came in and I said, oh my gosh, you won't believe what happened. I can't believe it. I need some more help with this, versus beginning to start protecting the addiction.
Right.
And hide the using behavior.
Yes.
So now there are some potential consequences. So I miss work. I get a DUI. I sneak money so that my spouse or my parents or someone isn't going to know that I took money out of the account and used it to go buy drugs or go to the package store. That I'm doing something now that has a lot more intention than I got really upset, stopped at the bar, had a drink, immediately went, oh, what did I just do? I got to go call, I'm going to a meeting. I got to go call somebody. I don't want to do this. This is not what I want, and I want to stop it. And I'm not hiding it. I'm going to tell my sponsor. I'm going to go to a meeting and talk about it. I'm going to call up whoever I need to call up. I'm not trying to cover up for the disease. I'm going to tell on the disease.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not keeping a secret. I'm not doing additional things that make the situation potentially a lot worse.
Right.
I am owning it. I'm working a 10th step. I recognize that I've made a mistake and I'm going to promptly admit it and do what I need to do to make it right. So it's when those behaviors, even if the using time was minimal,
Mm-hmm.
maybe a day or two, if there are these additional behaviors that begin to be very reminiscent of the addictive behaviors, I'm keeping it secret, I'm lying to people, I'm missing important obligations, I'm putting myself in dangerous situations, and I'm keeping it a secret, even if for a day or two.
And the other thing that we should talk about right here is sometimes those addictive behaviors start months before this actual use of a drug or alcohol, because many times you'll talk to someone who has some, decent amount of time of sobriety, and little by little, in say year 2.5 or something, they start keeping secrets. They stop going to meetings. They don't call their sponsor as much, only when they absolutely have something going on, and then they use. And all these little behaviors, these little red flags have come up along the way.
Mm-hmm.
They still haven't used alcohol or drugs yet. But then once they do it, it crosses over, and that becomes, I think, a relapse.
But and that speaks to the whole idea that relapses tend to not just happen. There's a lot of buildup to a relapse that sets that up and makes it a possibility. But as opposed to a slip, where, as you said, had a really rough day at work and was driving home and then just
Said,
stopped and had a drink and then immediately got
Right.
back on track.
Mm-hmm.
And for that person who's been slowly getting back into the disease process, and having that relapse,
Mhm.
Beginning to just label it as a slip actually is still part of those addictive
Addictive
processes.
behaviors.
I'm going to try to find a way to phrase this that you're not going to look at
Quite
me like
catch
I've
on.
gone back
Yeah.
into
Right.
this disease.
And I think that is such an important point, David. And I really like the idea that how much you had to drink or how much you used, how long you did it, does not necessarily define whether it's a slip or a relapse. And that you often take patients and will do a relapse autopsy. And that, I think, gets to the point that you made, Michael, that the relapse often is not when they pick up and use. The relapse started days, weeks, months before, and that it is really important to not just take the immediate detail, but to really go back and look at, were there warning signs? So when you're doing a relapse autopsy with someone, what does that look like?
So for me, when I'm doing it, I really have them kind of backtrack. This is the day of relapse, and then going back and looking at the 24 hours before that, and the week before that, and the 2 weeks before that, and looking for when they started doing something that was separating them from their recovery system, whether it was beginning little white lies, or whether it was beginning to skip important meetings, or moving and not getting a new sponsor, or not setting up a new recovery system, whatever it was, but just kind of backtracking from that drink or from that slip to when they began becoming isolated in their own process.
And I think it's really interesting when I've worked with folks that have had a relapse, not a slip, but a relapse. Some of them have been planning it for a year or more. I think of folks that have been on probation.
Mm-hmm.
I think of folks that have been in a monitoring
Mhm.
program where They have signed an agreement they're not going to drink or use illicit substances or prescription drugs without permission for a couple of years, 5 years, and they in their mind are setting it up. They're thinking about, okay, this is the day that I'm no longer eligible for drug testing. This is the day I'm off probation. This is the day that I'm not going to have to call in at 5 o'clock in the morning and determine whether or not today's the day I've got to go give a urine drugs sample. It's very interesting how many people have been planning it for a long time. Now, they haven't been talking about it necessarily, and outwardly it looks very much like they've been extremely compliant, and then there was just this one day and there was this one thing and it happened.
Right. But pretty much when somebody is in that place, a lot of folks that are around them all the time, we can see that. And the thing is that even I think as an alcoholic or an addict, like, you can start to know when that new strategy or your routine starts to break and things start to happen, and things, you just watch it happening, and their routine stops and they stop doing this, stop doing that, stop doing this, and they're all fine, they're all good, they're all whatever, and then all of a sudden, boom,
they're in trouble. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about more surviving relapse.
Perhaps you are struggling to cope with the disease of addiction. If not, you probably know a family member or friend that needs help in battling the cravings and the personal and professional damage done by the effects of drugs or alcohol. Get a pen and paper and be ready to write down the following. These are the issues that the trained staff at the Atlanta Healing Center address and treat every day. Their doctors and counselors with over 40 years of practice in the field of addiction can treat the suffering individual in a thoughtful, compassionate, and experienced manner and guide him or her along the path to recovery. So call 770-696-9862 and speak to a knowledgeable staff member about how you or your loved one can be helped to enjoy a better and healthier life. More information is also available on the website at www.atlantahealingcenter.com.
Hello, I'm Dr. Mike Karuchak. Have you ever wondered what doctors talk about amongst themselves? If you do, join us on the Doctor's Lounge and hear the doctors' conversations amongst themselves. Join me and my co-host, Dr. Hal Schertz, every Thursday morning, 8 to 9 a.m.
The disease of addiction is a life-altering challenge, not just for the person suffering its effects, but also for the family and friends who support and love the one caught in its grasp. What should be the course of treatment? Who is the best person to render treatment? And what is the best place to go for the care that is needed? We know that you want answers to these and many more questions. Call 770-696-9862 and speak to a representative of the Atlanta Healing Center. They can tailor a program specifically designed to address the needs of the person suffering with an addiction, or give you guidance as to where that help may be found. Information is the key, and the trained staff at AHC is here to assist. If you wish, you can also get more information on the website located at www.atlantahealingcenter.com.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
Welcome back. I'm Dr. Susan Blank. This is Detailing Addiction on America's Web Radio. Today, Michael Daly and David Donaldson are with me in the studio, and we're talking about this very difficult conversation to have, and that's about relapse. So we've defined a slip as a brief exposure to a substance or a behavior that has been addictive to the person in the past. And then the person recognizes it, has not planned for it, recognizes that they've done this, and immediately go and ask for help and get honest with everybody. Mm-hmm. And that and a relapse. So sometimes patients will come in and they'll tell us, you're my 17th treatment center, or I've never really been sober for more than 2 months.
Mhm.
And they have obviously had a series of brief encounters with not using or not behaving in an addictive way, but maybe not have had real solid long-term recovery. Do you think those relapses are easier or harder to deal with than someone who's got long-term sobriety, maybe 10 years, maybe 20 years, and then they have a relapse? Who has an easier time, or does it make any difference?
If
So I mean, I think of those as two really different stories.
I do too. Mhm.
That first person, and this, I mean, it really hits a button of mine. That first person real often is somebody who had a slip, and the treatment center that they're going to treats it like a relapse and
Right.
throws them out.
Correct.
And so shames them, gives them a message that they're a loser and a failure, and
And you can't stay here.
and forgets that this is a disease that has relapse and puts this real moral thing on it.
and that's the whole reason that that particular organization is there, is to help that person.
Right. And they don't seem to really understand the disease they're treating. And at the same time, this person is collecting treatment centers and having no success. At the Atlanta Healing Center, that often really shocks somebody, because I think there are some people who will relapse in order to get kicked out of places.
Right. And they've said that, actually.
and that's not ever our first approach to a relapse. We talk about what happened, and we try to figure out if this is going to work and try to keep them moving forward.
Right. As long as they're safe.
As long as they're safe, and as long as they want to recover.
Right. Keep trying. Mhm.
But that second scenario, that person who I think that they have either a dissatisfaction with the recovering world, or a building resentment with people in recovery, or a real just secret of missing some aspect of their using life, missing either a club scene or missing just something that they haven't been able to
bored.
vocalize, boredom maybe.
Mhm.
And when they have a relapse, it can be so tragic, because their willingness to be able to start over
And to ask for help
is
is zero sometimes.
yeah.
And that's the problem, is that once a person has had long-term sobriety, has helped numerous other people,
Right.
has started speaking and telling their story and sponsoring, and then they have a slip, which quickly turns into a relapse, which quickly turns into, I can't go back there.
Right.
You know,
I've heard many people say things like, I might have another relapse in me, but I don't have another recovery in me.
Mhm.
Speaking to that, I don't know if I go back out using or behaving in an addictive way, I don't know that I can ever get back.
Mhm.
And they aren't necessarily meaning, because I'm going to, the first time I use, I'm going to overdose on heroin and die. That's not what they mean. They mean that the shame, the struggle, and knowing how hard you have to work.
Right.
I think that's the other piece of it. Being in recovery is hard.
Yes.
It's harder sometimes than others, but it requires constant maintenance. You can't just plant your yard once and then turn it over to, Mother Nature and hope that good things happen,
Right.
and come back in 10 years and not expect either a weed patch or dirt with no grass on it. It's a constant maintenance. Sometimes it's harder than others.
That is a really good analogy, because there are many, many springs when I'll be like waiting for spring, and I'll be waiting to go to the store and buy all kind of plants and get it in there and make this really beautiful garden. And there's other springs when I will look out at the yard and I'll be just like, I'm not going to do it this year.
Right.
I'm going to let those weeds grow, and I just don't. It's a perfect analogy for the constant, consistent work you have to do if
Right.
you want to keep a garden
lush,
that looks beautiful.
And that is fun and safe and beautiful and an inspiration to other people. So I think of it like that. It doesn't have to be an arduous, horrible, awful, boring, serious thing all the time. Who would want that for their life?
Right.
Recovery is a joyful thing. Hopefully people feel better, live better, act better, have better relationships, better financial situations, better jobs, lots of things about their life is better because they're in recovery. But it's still hard sometimes. It's really hard. And keeping that up for any of us, we're human. It is hard sometimes to keep up the level of intensity. And I think sometimes people get tired. They get bored with it. They, like you say, they get a resentment against somebody. Their lifestyle changes in some way. And,
sometimes you get invited to a party and you want to be able to just go to that party and be a normal person and have Cinco de Mayo is coming up, to go have a margarita,
right.
just like everybody else at the party. And after a long period of time, your brain is like, it's going to be fine. It's been so long. When in reality, it's not.
Right. And I think the other thing that you have to look at, and I try to help people understand, is that as you go through your sobriety, the way you're dealing with it in, say, year 3 is a lot different than the way you're dealing with it in year 8. And as you're getting sober and getting longer amounts of sobriety, you have to learn what has to stay with you and what has to be kind of let go. And it's interesting to me when I go to a clubhouse where there's meetings going on, and you go into a meeting and you see somebody that you knew from day one, and this is 18 years ago, and they're still there and they're still going to every meeting, a meeting
every
a day.
day.
They're there every single solitary day, and they're miserable.
Right.
And I think, that's the message you at first get, but you have to learn how to slowly start to live life, keeping a portion of your sobriety, keeping the sobriety, but the recovery, and learn how to deal with it as you're going along.
It's really interesting because last week I went on a trip with some family members, and we went to hear Professor Brian Cox, who's a cosmologist, astrophysicist from Manchester, England. And he was doing this incredible description of the time-space continuum, Einstein's theory of relativity and special relativity. Black holes had this wonderful, specially developed audiovisual presentation. And I was sitting there thinking, I remember learning about the solar system. I remember as a kid learning about the moon. And I remember learning that, we're part of the Milky Way galaxy. That in the beginning, the very basic things that you learn, and they're fascinating, and they're really interesting. And you make the little dioramas and you cut up the colored paper to make the rings of Saturn, and you do all of these things. And then it kind of seems a little silly if you don't keep studying and digging deeper and deeper, thinking about recovery in that way, that you've got to continue to learn and be fascinated and take it to the next level, just like learning about the solar system all the way to the Big Bang and the the cosmic dust
Mhm.
that they can see now. It is so fascinating, but I could never have understood that as a child. I don't understand it as an adult. Let's just be honest. If I was asked to do any of those math equations, forget it. I don't have enough fingers and toes, but the idea that you can continue to be fascinated, and if you don't nurture that, just back to your lawn, if you don't nurture it and keep delving into it and ways to make your recovery more interesting and your understanding of the disease or your understanding of codependency, that's the work that has to keep happening.
The word that comes to mind is enrichment.
Yes.
In anything, if you're not enriching that activity as you're going along, you get bored.
Mhm.
And you don't care, and you take it for granted, and you get complacent. So, that whole idea of enrichment, I think,
Right.
is really important.
Going to a new meeting, reading a new book, going to a lecture, listening to a YouTube video, doing some independent study, thinking about it in a different way, maybe adding Al-Anon or a CODA group and learn about it from the other side and learn about your relationships. It is constant effort,
Mhm.
but hopefully you can find a way to make it still meaningful and keep you engaged. Because if it were the first few days of recovery, people are just, it's all they can do to hold themselves together enough. They feel so sick, they feel so bad to just walk in the door and plop down. They're not going to hear a thing that's said. They're not going to remember anything except, well, they probably won't remember anything.
Right.
But so all they can do is just survive.
Right.
And if you continue to treat your recovery as I've got to go to the same meetings every single day and I hate this, but I'm going because I'm afraid if I don't, you're miserable. Like
Right.
you said, seeing your friend from many years before still
Miserable.
Same old thing.
and
Yep.
unhappy
And surviving.
critical.
They're still surviving.
and that's better than not. But recovery can be a beautiful thing, and it should be a beautiful thing. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about how can you really help yourself survive a relapse. Thanks for listening.
Perhaps you are struggling to cope with the disease of addiction. If not, you probably know a family member or friend that needs help in battling the cravings and the personal and professional damage done by the effects of drugs or alcohol. Get a pen and paper and be ready to write down the following. These are the issues that the trained staff at the Atlanta Healing Center address and treat every day. Their doctors and counselors with over 40 years of practice in the field of addiction can treat the suffering individual in a thoughtful, compassionate, and experienced manner and guide him or her along the path to recovery. So call 770-696-9862 and speak to a knowledgeable staff member about how you or your loved one can be helped to enjoy a better and healthier life. More information is also available on the website at www.atlantahealingcenter.com.
Whether cruising the strip in a 57 Chevy or taking the family on a vacation in a 71 Oldsmobile Vista Cruiser, you need to tune in to Classic Cars with Steve Ronaldo and Jim Weber every Saturday from 8 to 9 a.m. on americaswebradio.com.
The disease of addiction is a life-altering challenge, not just for the person suffering its effects, but also for the family and friends who support and love the one caught in its grasp. What should be the course of treatment? Who is the best person to render treatment? And what is the best place to go for the care that is needed? We know that you want answers to these and many more questions. Call 770-696-9862 and speak to a representative of the Atlanta Healing Center. They can tailor a program specifically designed to address the needs of the person suffering with an addiction or give you guidance as to where that help may be found. Information is the key, and the trained staff at AHC is here to assist. If you wish, you can also get more information on the website located at www.atlantahealingcenter.com.
Perhaps you are struggling to cope with the disease of addiction. If not, you probably know a family member or friend that needs help in battling the cravings and the personal and professional damage done by the effects of drugs or alcohol. Get a pen and paper and be ready to write down the following. These are the issues that the trained staff at the Atlanta Healing Center address and treat every day. Their doctors and counselors with over 40 years of practice in the field of addiction can treat the suffering individual in a thoughtful, compassionate, and experienced manner and guide him or her along the path to recovery. So call 770-696-9862 and speak to a knowledgeable staff member about how you or your loved one can be helped to enjoy a better and healthier life. More information is also available on the website at www.atlantahealingcenter.com.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
Welcome back. This is Detailing Addiction. I'm Dr. Susan Blank, and I'd like to thank Michael Daly and David Donaldson for being with me today and helping with this discussion about relapse. Because while we do know that a chronic illness, there are going to be periods of potential relapse, we want people to really understand that it is never too late and that they can ask for help, that there's not a judgment. There's not a judgment in AA. There's not a judgment in 12-step programs. Certainly not a judgment at the Atlanta Healing Center. We're just happy to see people back. And it's always interesting to me to have a situation where we may have done an assessment on somebody 7 years ago.
Right.
And the person was angry and frustrated and
Wasn't ready.
didn't really want to have that conversation that day. And yet 7 years later may call and say, I'm ready. And I remember, and thank you. And thanks for being willing to help me now that I'm finally hearing what you said to me. So I don't want people to ever think that they're too far gone, that there's not any hope. But David, I think that the relapse autopsy, you've got, in order to be able to move forward, you've got to figure out what didn't work before.
Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely.
Or where things veered off the track, particularly for those folks that have gotten into recovery. And now there's...
And especially when you say where things got off track, I still think that the really important step with autopsy is willingness to go all the way back to where it started.
Mhm.
People want to go back maybe a week or two, or the what I call the real near,
Right.
past.
I lost my
I mean,
job.
and start from there. And it didn't start there.
Right. Very often it didn't.
And generally, in that first period that they go back to, what you're going to hear is their defense systems, because they're always going to have something to blame.
Mm-hmm.
Either they lost their job, or they got cut off in traffic, or the birds are singing so loud that morning, something that they can put the focus on,
Right.
rather
Somebody
than
broke
being
up
able
with me.
to look at it. And part of what I think is crucial about a relapse autopsy, my mouth isn't working, is that it's not something a person can do by themselves.
Right.
They
Or
need
in one day.
to, or yeah, definitely not in one day, but they need to be willing to sit down with a counselor or with a sponsor or with a friend and just start backtracking. Look at whatever that event was in that week, and then look at why they were vulnerable there, and look at
And in effect, when you're going back and looking at all that stuff, it's almost as if you're going through the steps backwards.
yeah, it's a good way of looking at it.
When I first got sober, I didn't get sober in 3 weeks. I stopped using, and then I started gaining sobriety. But as I was working the steps, it took 10 months to get through the first 6 steps.
Mm-hmm.
And why would we think that just because I have 10 years or whatever, and I had a relapse, that it's going to happen any quicker?
Right.
Part of the vulnerability that those people experience is that when they go to a treatment center or recovery program, real often they are immediately put on to step one, and they're told, okay, obviously you had something wrong with, so let's start at the beginning. And not only is that not getting to them to the information they need, but most of them are really aware that this isn't the issue. And so they might be compliant or they might be resistant, but they're not getting what they need by just being thrown back to step one.
Right.
But the whole idea of you're going backwards through this and looking at where you were separating yourself from people and looking at where you were beginning to keep secrets again or
build resentments and not
again.
take your part in it, and not look at any self-inventory, not, I mean, you can look at a number of different things and start to see what happened.
Mm-hmm.
Beginning with step 12, where they step 12 is having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, sought to carry the message. So did you stop believing the message that was taught to you? Did you stop helping newcomers? Did you stop
being of service?
Being of service to others?
Did you get back to a narcissistic viewpoint where it's all about me and not being willing to look at helping and being of service and being outside of yourself?
Right. And that kind of goes back with the enrichment,
Mm-hmm.
thought or philosophy that as you're doing it, you have to keep those things as part of the enrichment, the helping others, the talking to another alcoholic or addict.
Did you stop going out and getting new annual flowers to put in there?
Right.
Yeah, I love that analogy. I'm going to be using that a lot.
Okay, good. I'm so glad. It makes sense to me, and I do feel strongly that we have to acknowledge that it is not an easy thing. Doesn't have to be a horrible thing, but it's not always an easy thing to work a program of recovery and to look at your motives for the choices that you make and to keep trying to be centered and be in the present and have a sense of gratitude.
Mm-hmm.
I think gratitude is one of the first things to go as I look at people going through a recovery. A relapse autopsy, going through a relapse is often that feeling of I'm really grateful. I'm grateful that I'm here. I'm grateful for all of the things that we can all list that we're grateful for. When I'm spending more of my day on the things I'm not so grateful for, then I'm realizing I'm getting into a really bad place.
Right.
So,
and one thing that you kind of start to see as you gain some time in sobriety is that you see these people that have a certain amount of time and then a relapse, and then they gain a little bit of time and then a relapse, and then get some more time and then another relapse. And you look at them and you think, oh my God, I don't know how they have the continuing drive to do this.
Strength and courage.
Because they're working a whole lot harder than somebody that just kind of spreads it out over a longer period of time. And that's goes with that talking about, the longer a person has, the harder a time they're going to have getting back into it.
But the other part that I've been thinking about as we've been talking is that when somebody has a longer period of time, if they have a slip, their amount of time keeps them from being able to just own it as a slip.
Right.
And also people around them will not allow them to own it as a slip. They will label it as a relapse, and they will treat them as a relapsing person. I'm thinking about this person I knew years and years ago that had many years sober from alcoholism, and he had been a nurse, and a good friend of his had been diagnosed with cancer. And so being a nurse, he felt he would be fine to help this person out, and ended up slipping on her pain medication
Oh,
and then back to alcohol. And the judgment that that person felt practically pushed him out of recovery, when in reality he was not prepared for what he faced when he slipped.
right. And that, I think, is one of the challenges of being in recovery and maintaining your sobriety and your recovery, which is daily maintenance and daily honestly looking at what are my motivations? Why am I making these choices? Am I exercising because it helps me be strong and flexible, because it's good for me, it helps me manage my stress? Or am I looking for the runner's high? Am I escaping? Am I eating because my body needs fuel and I need to keep it healthy and strong? Or am I eating to change my mood? Am I eating because I'm bored or sad or lonely? Questioning your motives is the long-term maintenance that has to be done, and the brutal honesty with yourself keeps you sober. Thanks, everybody, for listening, and we'll see you all next week on Detailing Addiction.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.